I'm not alone in being able to remember every single sound effect from this opening bumper, am I? I love seeing Luxo break the eye. As per usual with April Fool's Day, I'm going to be doing something a little different. This time, it's Pixar movies. Now, Pixar was around for quite some time before they started working with Disney, but they never had a full feature-length film until then. As of 2014, Pixar has had 14 feature-length films. If your favorite does not show up on this list, well, I hate to be frank, but I really didn't like it. Yeah, sorry about that.
Number 10.
People like to say that the relationship between Carl and Ellie in Up is very heartwarming, but at the very beginning, that's kinda hard to see. Within the first 10 minutes, Ellie pressures Carl into making a promise that's very difficult to keep, and next thing you know, they're married. It really begs the question of what happened in between. While everything after the wedding is extremely powerful, how quickly they fall in love has to be the second fastest time in Pixar history. The film's main message is about not living in the past and instead looking forwards towards the future. However, it's kind of ironic because old people such as Carl Fredricksen really don't have much of a future in the first place. I know that sounds really cynical, but that means that my statement fits perfectly within Up because Up relies a lot on dark humor.
Please let me in.
No.
It's a mediocre movie overall. There isn't much to talk about that makes it great, and there isn't much to talk about that makes it bad. It's pretty much the measuring stick for the quality in a Pixar film. Most of their movies are better than it, but occasionally the studio will stumble and make one that isn't as good. On the bright side, that means it only gets better from here.
Number 9.
As a standalone film, Monsters University is a decent film, I suppose. It follows the basic story of a ragtag team of underdogs accomplishing a goal, but the real genius of this film comes from the fact that it's a prequel. The film focuses on Mike Wazowski and how he wanted to become a scarer, but how he eventually became Sully's partner at Monsters, Inc. However, someone could make the argument that the film doesn't fit perfectly with Monsters, Inc. One example in some of the first lines in Monsters, Inc. is Mike saying that Sully has been jealous of him ever since the 4th grade, but they met in college. Maybe Mike was using a hyperbole, but it really raises a few eyebrows. When Monsters University isn't arguably contradicting Monsters, Inc., it complements Monsters, Inc. For example, we learn that Randall isn't mean to Sully just because he's a jerk, but because he's a jerk with a vengeance. The interactions between Mike and Sully in this film strengthen the interactions between them in the next film, which is pretty powerful. The film also works really well with backwards character development. In Monsters University, Mike is a hard worker similar to Sully in Monsters, Inc., but the torment the university launches at him eventually takes its toll on him, and by Monsters, Inc., he becomes a wisecracker with a mild hatred for everything. Without Monsters University, Monsters, Inc. wouldn't be as close to number 1 as it is, and by that standard and that standard alone, Monsters University is a resounding success.
Number 8.
If there's one thing Pixar loves doing, it's putting in secret tidbits for watchful viewers. By this logic, developing Cars was a ball with a red star on it. Some references are more obvious than others. Enoco is the gas station where Woody and Buzz were dropped off in the first Toy Story, and 95 on Lightning McQueen is the year that Toy Story came out. Having references is fine and dandy, but what about the actual film itself? I have to say I quite enjoyed it. I like how Lightning McQueen is an arrogant hotshot at first, but constantly trying to have his way forces him to realize that life isn't all about going fast. I also like that Mater is an idiot without overdoing it, for the most part. Pretty much all of the other non-negligible minor characters also have a great part somewhere in the movie. If there's one thing I don't like about Cars though, it's its animation of static objects. These cacti look like they belong in Toy Story, but that was released 11 years prior. The premise behind Cars is that you come for the characters yet stay for the Pixar and automobile references. A winning combination if you ask me.
Number 7.
I have watched Toy Story 3 only once. Not because I'm lacking in free time or anything, I just feel like watching it again would destroy the impact the original viewing had on me. It doesn't take 5 minutes for someone who grew up with Toy Story to realize that Toy Story 3 isn't going to be easy to watch. Is that because the movie has some writing flaws? Well, maybe, but I was mostly referring to the ending. Even though the toys don't change their facial expressions, you can tell that they're happy that Andy's playing with them, even if it's for the last time. I have never been that close to crying due to a movie before, and I watched The Boy in Striped Pajamas. Hopefully that'll be more of an indicator to the strength of Toy Story 3 rather than my twisted priorities. While I would say that some people overstate its critical success, I can completely understand why it grossed over $1 billion at the box office. It's a great ending to the Toy Story trilogy, and it's one of those movies you either have to see only once or many, many times. I chose the former route, but if other people wanted to pay extra money to see it again, that's their understandable prerogative. But the billion-dollar question is, could they ever make a sequel?
Number 6.
Who would have thought that a character that can say so little could say so much? Apparently Pixar did, and that's how we got WALL-E. Let's get the negatives out of the way first, because there are two big ones. First, the use of real-life actors just clashes with the animation. Second, it's an idiot plot. If the president of By and Large never told the autopilot to never come back to Earth, it could have followed the primary directive of only coming back when life is discovered on Earth, and the primary conflict would have never happened. And if the most important part of the primary directive was supposed to be that the Axiom's trip would only last 5 years, the president could have sent a new directive to the autopilot saying that it should stall for time. Oh, but no, Earth is completely 100% screwed for all time. How could the president of the most prolific company in Earth's history ever be wrong? There's also a small thing that irks me where two previously mentioned minor characters start having a relationship in the time it takes for me to finish this sentence. With such silly mistakes, you would think WALL-E would be a bust, but no. First of all, WALL-E's antics are either hilarious or endearing every single time. And yes, you'd have to be blind to not be able to see this movie as a social commentary on our current lifestyle if it were extrapolated 800 years into the future. Aside from the flaws I've already mentioned, the message works really well as the humans realize the illusion around them and work to regain the independence they've lost to the robots. In that sense, it's almost like a kid-friendly Matrix. Fortunately enough for WALL-E, the good aspects easily outweigh the bad.
Number 5.
Ah yes, the movie that started it all, the first one to ever be completely computer animated, the one with just the right amount of adult humor to keep parents entertained, the one that contains action without it feeling forced. This is Toy Story. The animation is archaic, but the writing is just as good as ever. It's kind of funny actually, I watched this movie a lot when I was a kid, but watching it while I'm older, it feels like a completely different movie. It's impossible to know about Pixar without knowing about this film, but I'd really like to say that Woody is amazingly resourceful. With such problem-solving skills, it's no surprise that Woody is the leader of Andy's toys. Oh, and past version of myself, no matter how many times you watch the scene and no matter how much you want it to be otherwise, Buzz will always fail to get to the window and fall and break himself. Sorry to be the breaker of bad news, but gravity is a cruel mistress.
Number 4.
And now for something I've been waiting for 2 years to finally do.
Hey! What just happened?
Stay close to Kurt!
You better hope there's hacky sack in hell, hippie!
That'll never get old. Now that that's out of the way, let's cut right to the chase. The second best part about The Incredibles is that it's a superhero movie and a superhero parody movie at the exact same time. It covers a lot of topics that Superman just seems to miss, like whether or not superheroes are liable for any damages they cause. What's even better is that each individual character has their own set of values and motivations. One interesting character in particular is Syndrome. He says that when he's done being a superhero, he's going to sell his high-tech gadgets to the world. That's not really that evil, is it? I mean, sure, he killed a couple superheroes on the way, but that's acceptable losses for jet boots, right? I mean, who wouldn't want jet boots? That's another example of how this film tackles the superhero cliché. If you tried hard enough, you could argue that the Incredibles are the villains. They're selfish assholes who want to be the only people who are incredible. Either way, every character in this film tries their hardest to succeed their goals, even the grunts. Yes, the most ridiculous part of superhero movies, where the lowest of henchmen have a hard time opening water bottles, is gone. If not for Dash's impeccable interruption, Violet would have been dead. D-E-D. But then again, maybe not. Since no character in this film is incompetent, she could have just put a force field up.
Number 3.
Monsters Inc. is to Sully as Monsters University is to Mike. They're both the main characters of their respective films, but Monsters Inc. does what it wants to do better. You could probably tell by my last line covering Monsters University that Monsters Inc. was going to be somewhere on this list and pretty high, so here it is. So yeah, it's pretty funny to watch Mike and Sully be stealth babysitters for Boo, but anyone that's watched enough Pixar at this point knows that jokes alone don't make a Pixar movie. There's the struggle between Sully and Randall, who has become the new underdog since Monsters University. There's the breathtaking sight of the door scene. There's the inner struggle of Sully when he finally realizes what his job is doing to children. Best of all, Pixar was able to create an imaginative world where viewers can easily understand the rules. The use of doors as teleporters doesn't take much effort to figure out, but it's a unique concept. The best minute of the entire film, though, has to be when Mike and Sully work together to expose the president of Monsters, Inc. for his conspiracy.
I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die. I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die.
And really, you have to appreciate how Mike acts so nonchalant when he realizes that he's won. I can't think of anything negative to say about this film. It flows well, the voice acting's good, and the characters are believable despite being monsters. So what could possibly top it?
Number 2.
Say, reach for the sky, and some people might just do that. Say, ka-chow, and people might think you're crazy. Say, mine, 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 and people will know that you're referencing Finding Nemo. The film clocks in at 100 minutes, but with everything that happens in this film, that's really hard to believe. Ask people what their favorite scene is in Finding Nemo, and you're sure to get a different answer each time. There's Bruce and his gang, Crush and his gang, the jellyfish, the list goes on. Finding Nemo is laced with a not-so-subtle irony. Marvin is willing to travel great lengths to rescue his son, but he won't let Nemo do anything. This fact constantly raises its ugly head until Marvin realizes that a life without risk isn't much of a life at all. Even though Marvin is kind of an unfavorable character, you still root for him and hope that he'll be reunited with his son. And even though the movie is supposed to be a comedy, you'll forget that soon enough as it constantly throws bigger and bigger things at you. Now before we get to number 1, let's do an honorable mention. The plot premise behind Cars 2 is that people interpret what an idiot says as great knowledge. Now, I'll say that if there's one movie plot that I'll never get tired of, it's that. The main problem with this movie, though, is that they make Mater way too much of an idiot. I mean, sure, in the first Cars he didn't have the brightest headlights, but at least he could still communicate. In this movie, he could have avoided a lot of problems if he just used the words literally and seriously at different points. The second issue I have with this movie is that it really didn't have to take place in the world of Cars. I mean, when you think of talking cars, the first thing you think of is spies, right? Disney and Pixar could have easily created a new franchise if they just replaced the cars with people, racing with foot racing, and the alternative gas for a new type of shoe. In reality, it might have been a good idea to change the name of this section to dishonorable mention for this video, because Cars 2 is a shining example of how not to make a sequel. Bruce Campbell's pretty cool though, can never get enough of him.
Number 1.
If Cars 2 is how not to make a sequel, Toy Story 2 is how to make a sequel. It builds off the source material perfectly. Ever wonder who that evil emperor was that Buzz Lightyear was rambling about for the first half of the first Toy Story? Well, here you go. The film also covers Woody's background and discusses the feelings of separation that toys feel when their owners grow up. Another thing that makes a sequel great is if you don't have to watch the original to appreciate it. Guess what? This movie does that. In short, Toy Story 2 takes the essence of the original without copying it. And yes, Toy Story 2 is very funny as well. New Buzz plays Buzz Lightyear better than Andy's Buzz, if that makes any sense. But the ultimate kicker is the credit sequence, where they do fake outtakes for an animated film. It's a funny, well-written movie that stays original, addresses interesting questions, has lovable characters, and has villains with understandable motives. In other words, it's what makes a Pixar movie a Pixar movie. If this is the first time you've ever watched one of my videos, I normally make lists and reviews for video games, hence my name, GamingTopTen. Check out my other videos if you're interested, and no matter what you do, have a fantastic day.
Rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice warm bed.
For some reason or another, I remember the password to unlock all of the cars in the Cars video game. It's Yay Cars, YAYCARS. I have no idea how I remember that, I've never even played the game. Chrono Trigger has an awesome and diverse soundtrack.